Welcome to the MyPersonalFootballCoach.com Youth Soccer Player Development Podcast, Episode 7 with Tom Byer.
Welcome to MyPersonalFootballCoach.com Soccer Player Development Podcast. Discover all the secrets, hints and tips about soccer player development and soccer coaching from some of the leading figures in world soccer. Here's your host, Saul Isaksson-Hurst.
Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of the MyPersonalFootballCoach.com Youth Soccer Player Development Podcast. Now this week we've got a great guest, Tom Byer, who's a technical coach, who's done a lot of work in Southeast Asia, was based in Japan, was huge in Japan, and now works as a consultant for the Chinese government to try and help develop football in China. Now I saw a presentation of his a few weeks ago in Geneva, and I was blown away, really interesting. Obviously he talks about many things about football development, but really key areas about trying to develop a culture of football, but also about supporting players' technical development between the ages of 2 and 6 years old. So that might sound a bit far out to some people, but trust me, I saw the presentation, I saw some of the videos which he chronologically recorded the development of his own kids from 2 to 6, and some of the technical development was really impressive. And as a former academy coach, thinking about we're getting players in with that technical base already, thinking about how far they could actually go. So really interesting. I'm sure you like it. In terms of myself, I've come back from the NSCAA conference in LA. Really recommend that to anybody who's really wants to try and learn and develop themselves as a coach. Connected with loads of people, lots of old friends as well. That was really good, and got a big couple of weeks coming up. Starting work with a big club in the Northwest and also one of the big clubs in Europe. So exciting times ahead. So without further ado, let's get into it. So Tom Byer, welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Can you give us a brief history of your playing and coaching background?
Sure. I'm originally from the United States, where I was born in New York, and I played in a junior college called Ulster County Community College back in the late 1970s, which, believe it or not, was a national perennial powerhouse back in the days. It was national champions 2 years in a row. And a lot of professional players came from that school. And then I wound up down at the University of South Florida in Tampa. Played with a player that many people know, Roy Wegerle, who had a very nice, good career in the UK. That was kind of a bad timing for people like myself wanting to be aspiring professionals, because the fledgling North American Soccer League basically folded around 1984, I believe it was. And I wound up over in Japan, and I had a short stint playing with Hitachi, which is currently in the Japanese professional league, in the J League, called Kashiwa Reysol. And I also did a short stint at an amateur team in England, a club called Leiston FC in the Ipswich Suffolk League. And then I got out of playing back around 1988 in Japan, and I fell in love with Japan. I wanted to stay here, and I started focusing on coaching kids, young kids under 12, because that's how they're divided up here in Japan. Under 12s is elementary school age children, and I pitched Nestle, the big chocolate company, with the idea of sponsoring me to do a national tour, to do what we call football clinics here. And long story short, I convinced them, and in 1989, for 10 years, I traveled all throughout Japan doing football clinics for children. And then there's kind of a timeline, but that started in 89. Then in the early 1990s, I was introduced to the work of Will Curver by my good friend Paul Mariner, the former striker of England, who convinced me to start focusing on technical development. And I basically became a technical coach. And then kind of the rest is history. Wound up, staying in Japan for many years, focusing on technical skills, created a company that focused on commercial football schools, As of today, they're the biggest company in Japan with over 100 schools. And then I also got casted on Japan's #1 television show for children back in 1998. And for about 14 years, I had my own football corner called Tom Soccer Techniques in Japan, which is on the #1 children's television show every weekday morning. And that went for 14 years. That coupled with still traveling around the country. So basically, kind of in a nutshell, that's what I've been doing. You can ask me some more questions, but basically that's kind of probably the long answer to your short question.
So what age do you think is the ideal time to start coaching young players?
Well, you know what? I really believe there's a big difference between these words of coaching kids and teaching kids. Kids are very difficult to coach to begin with at a very, very young age. So when I think of coaching, I think more of coaching as in, collective, 20 kids, a coach, they're in competition, they're playing games, you have to assign positions, you're coaching a team. I'd rather almost say coaching a team more than coaching players, whereas I believe that, the foundation to doing anything in football is the technical side. And that needs to be taught at a very young age. But coaching kids, I would say maybe from the ages of, let's say, at 7, 8 years of age, organizing them. Again, there's not a lot that you can do at those very young ages. But the point is that this, especially not a lot of coaching that can happen if kids haven't mastered the basics. And that's where I think everybody gets it wrong.
So, but obviously your work now, you just tell us a little bit about the difference between that teaching and coaching then, because obviously now your work now is based a lot of working with younger players, right?
Yes, it is. It is. And again, probably because you've heard the story before, but just for your listeners, I had a whole different rethink when my first children were born. I have 2 boys. One's 10, one's 8. So I'm coming at this from a different angle now. I'm coming at it more from a father's angle, having had experience as a technical coach in many different areas of the game for over 20 years. And then basically I had a rethink when I started thinking, well, what can I actually do with my own kids? And that's where I introduced these very tiny, small balls to my children as soon as they could start walking. And that all took place in the house, because when you have small children, a majority of their time is indoors. And to this day, now my kids are 10 and 8, and I'm sitting in my living room right now. I can look around and I see 4 little balls in my house right here. My kids were playing with them this morning. So it became part of the culture, part of the environment in our home. Kind of think of it as a favorite toy, but there's almost a day that does not go by in my house where the kids aren't at least fidgeting or playing or trying to beat each other or doing something with those balls every single day. Which is pretty powerful, because it becomes, when I talk about it, and I say that it becomes intrinsic, so that intrinsic motivational switch gets turned on from a very young age, because the kids were introduced to these small balls at a very young age, and basically they fell in love with playing with the ball. So I don't have to push my kids. I never do. Telling them you need to practice more or do anything, because they practice on their own a lot. So that's big.
So is it then they purely are left to their own devices? I mean, how much is instructed? How much is taught? How much is just them freedom of going out there or going in the home and expressing themselves?
Okay, well, for an example, I live in Tokyo. My 2 boys belong to their club team called Oyamadai Soccer Club, which is kind of associated with their school. And basically they train every Tuesday, every Thursday, and every Saturday and Sunday, or Sunday. It just depends on the week. I don't do much of anything at these days of instructing my kids, other than just I go to watch their games as much as possible. I praise them. For a long time, I wasn't really saying anything to my kids, because I didn't want to be kind of that pushy father, and I was very, very conscious about, not overstepping the boundary between father and coach. I very rarely even go to their practices. So I let them, that's their free time. And it wasn't only until recently that my oldest son just started asking me for ideas, and he asked me for advice on things, and I started doing that. But as a parent, I think I've done my job. I basically prepared my kids for the day that the day that they actually stepped their first foot onto a football pitch, to have any organized practice or training or coaching. I fulfilled my responsibility as I see it as a father, which basically helped them to, or at least nurtured them to master the core skills that are needed for a player to play.
So can you talk a little bit more detail then about that introduction? So what age did it start? I mean, what age do you think we should introduce the balls to players? And within that introduction, tell us a little bit more detail about how that looks in practice. I mean, is it, how do you guide them to develop things like, the stop and starts and using the weak foot and those sorts of things?
Sure. So again, like I said, it started in the house. As soon as my boys could start walking, there was a couple of balls around in every room, and it basically started with trying to discourage kicking, by showing by myself, which kids are very good at imitating, of just pulling the ball back. So I tried to get my kids comfortable with both feet, right foot, left foot, sole of the feet, just pulling the ball back. And then you just image or imagine, you've got a small kid, a 1 or 2 year old child. They're pulling the ball back. The ball's rolling along the floor. They're running after the ball to stop it. So they're doing this back and forth. And that's all I did in the beginning. And then it basically started graduating to where they could obviously control it a little bit better. But it was always learning to pull the ball back, because I realized that from a very young age, it was very beneficial to have it basically a reaction of being able to pull the ball back and at least have that feeling like they're protecting the ball, like it's my ball, you can't have it, and doing it with both feet. And now today, when I fast forward and I look at that, and just not the pulling the ball back, but stopping, starting, turning, changing direction, cutting with the ball, but everything was happening inside the house with both feet. And then occasionally, of course, when we go outside, we do the same thing. But I've always encouraged to try to protect the ball and pull the ball back as much as possible. Now, it's kind of funny because in Japan here, I'm very well known as a technical coach, and I've made videos. I've made 5 videos, basically technical videos showing many different ways to beat players, whether it's the old curve or step over moves or step around moves or all those things. But I didn't teach those to my kids, and all I did was teach them to be the best at pulling the ball back with both the right foot and the left foot. And for some reason, that basically set on that intrinsic motivational switch when they could see that they could master the ball themselves, that they could hold the ball, they could keep the ball, they could pull the ball back. And today, when you fast forward now and I look at my kids, not only they're the best technically, skill-wise dribbling with the ball, but they're the best passers, they're the best receivers, they understand combination play better. So these little things in the beginning seem to have given them a tremendous head start and accelerated learning. And then it basically almost goes into autopilot, because again, when a small child can learn to do something or master something, if you think of it and you look at some of the great players in the world, right? I mean, who is the best player in the world? I mean, debatable, but I think probably Messi is, right?
Yeah.
If you look at what Messi can do, he's the best in the world at stopping, starting, turning, and changing direction, and at a ridiculous rate where he accelerates. He doesn't do any fancy moves. He's just very quick, agile, and great at pulling the ball back, stopping and starting with the ball. So I kind of joke around and I say, well, kids, you might want to practice that. And so once you get a kid hooked in, where they actually feel that they can do something and they can master something and they have confidence and they've got, more motivation, because basically kids are motivated to do things that they enjoy doing. And what I say is I maintain is that a majority of children who play the sport are technically incompetent. Most of them, a majority of kids, I would say that. and throughout the world.
Well, it's quite interesting you say that, Tom, because obviously I do a lot of skills type stuff here in England, skills work, and I notice a lot of the players are technically not good enough maybe, and also physically as well. You're talking about there your kids who can do it off both sides, and I work with a lot of players and even academy players who can't dribble with the left foot, put the weak foot on the ball, pull it back. So that even, you're talking about a bit of physical illiteracy as well. And I think you talk about there about not kicking the ball, and I read it in your book as well about you talk about England having maybe a historically over reliance on physicality. And I think there as well, there's the culture here has always been about kicking the ball, being strong, physical, getting up the pitch quick. So even here we're struggling with that culture of trying to encourage players to stay on the ball, given time to stay on the ball, even at the elite level. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And it's not just the UK or England. I think it's many countries in the world. I mean, if you look at the entry level for the sport is kicking and shooting for most kids. So when you go around to a park, that's why in my presentation, when you go around to the parks in the world, you'll find a majority of them, small children with fathers, could be a mom, but basically it's usually fathers, and they're out and they're kicking the ball back and forth. And they're proud. I've had so many people send me, videos on Facebook or Twitter or some of the social network, and showing me that they're so proud because their little 2 or 3 year old can kick the ball. So that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that there has to be an attitude change. There has to be a shift in the culture. I always, I use the comparison that if you go to maybe a Latin country and you give a small child a ball and try to challenge them for the ball, more often than not, they might pull the ball back and keep it. I know that would happen with my kids, but with a lot of kids in the world, if you give them a ball and challenge them for it, they'll kick the ball away, and they'll either run and chase after it or they'll freeze. And again, for me, I found that once I could get my kids were instilled with that it's more about when someone challenges you for the ball, you pull it back and you protect it. For me, it seems to be a game changer. It seems to change the trajectory and the mentality of kids when they're playing. And go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, obviously now. So how's that work in practice now? Obviously now you work across Asia and the world, and you're talking about encouraging the 2 to 6 year old age group become more technical. How does that look though? For a layperson, for a parent, who doesn't have your experience in coaching, how do they support their young kids with stopping them from kicking it and developing these cutbacks and these getting their foot on the ball? What's how does that look in practice for somebody?
Well, again, I'm talking from my angle because I did it myself, right? Because I am a coach who experienced, but I've got 2 kids and I've done it. But all I can tell you is that everything that I did could be done by any parent if they have the knowledge. So what does that mean? That means that, for example, in China, where I work, we have programs that basically go out and basically educate parents. We've got a major media component as well. I just got done filming a television series for CETV, which is China Educational Television. That corner is going to run 365 days starting in March. So every single day, there'll be a 1-point lesson on technical skills. Now, that's a little bit geared more for older kids, but we're also starting a new project that's going to focus primarily on under 6, kids under 6, but more importantly, their parents. So it's an education, It's like, you go around and look what the federations do. They have A license courses, B, C, D. Some of them even have F now, the U.S. has. But none of them are focused on parents' education, which I was quite surprised. They focus traditionally on coaches because why wouldn't you? Everybody believes that if you want to be a good football player, you need to put your kid with a good coach. And I challenged that. I challenged that because when I started reading a lot of the biographies of a lot of the great players from many generations, I realized more often than not, a lot of them didn't have coaches until they were older. You only hear the stories of the Messis and the Iniestas like that Barcelona produced them. And I challenge that sometimes because, of course, these are great club teams. These are great academies in the world. But come on, I mean, to get the attention of a Barcelona, you've got to be an incredible talent to begin with. So that's the question everybody wants to know. How do you get to that level? It's way before the academies of the professional clubs. So what I say and maintain is that there's certain countries in the world that are conducive to developing players, and it's because of the culture. I don't believe that it's a special expertise in coaching per se, which gets the ire up of a lot of coaches, especially elite coaches, because they want to believe that because they were lucky enough to have their kid in their academy while they were there, that somehow they're responsible for that kid's success throughout his whole career. Now, of course, I'm being a bit provocative, and not to say that these academies are important, because they are, but people need to understand that it's way before that, and there's many things, and the starting age of what kids can do and how they can start learning the basic technical skills of stopping, starting, turning, changing direction. That's not a coaching thing. That happens way before. And almost every great player that you find, that you look into and you do a little bit of research, you'll find that kid started playing from a very, very, very young age. And more often than not, it was the influence of the father, the brother, the cousin, whoever it was. So
I think I noticed in your book, which we talk about a bit later as well. I mean, you talked about bilingual, trilingual children as well. So I suppose it's the same, right? So I mean, if 2 to 6 year olds learning these languages, and they learn the language of football, and that's which takes a little bit of learning off others and discovering themselves, and it's all a bit of a process.
Absolutely. I mean, there's always this question in sports, right? Is it nature? Is it nurture? Are you born with it? Is it learned? Is it art? Is it science? I mean, and of course, you've got certain kids that have more natural talent than other kids. You can just look at kids sometimes and even see that before them even touching a ball or doing any sport at all. But I do believe that we can do much, much more on the nurture side. And again, I mean, if you think about it, right, there are, as I say in my presentations, there's 211 member associations in FIFA. Only 8 have ever won a World Cup. And out of those 8, there's only 3 that are like serial repeaters. It's the same one. There's Brazil, Germany, and Italy. 5 times, 4 times, 4 times. Spain once, France once, England once, Uruguay twice, or Argentina twice. But the reality is that the other 200 countries, or at least 100 or 150 of them, don't look like they'll ever win a World Cup. And again, when you look at those countries that are doing so well, you've got to take a look at the culture and the environment that they're in. And nobody's really kind of broken it down. I don't think up until I've started shining some light on this subject, there hasn't been too much talk about the role of parents in a football player. In fact, most people look at parents adversarially. They look at them as adversaries. They look at them like they should never be working with their kids. They shouldn't be coaching their kids. But that's where I say there's a big difference. As parents, we can teach our kids certain things and let the coaches coach the kids. And the reality is that you've got countries in the world, such as America, which I'm going to go to next week, and yourself as well. And as you'll see, very, very well-educated coaches in the United States. They're very well-educated. But the reality is that we've got half the population of Europe and the United States. And I ask the question, where's the players? And if you do look at the good players that have come out of a country like the United States, Landon Donovan, Clint Dempsey, the boy playing in Germany now, Pulisic, all 3 of those kids, when you research and you study, how did they start? Again, it's attributed to the families, the parents. So to me, it's pretty clear. It's as clear as the nose on the end of my face. But for some reason, people haven't gotten it for a long time.
Why do you think then America haven't had the success in producing players? Also, I lived there for a couple of years coaching out there. I know it's a massive grassroots sports, lots of boys and girls playing. Obviously, they had success at the girls level, but why aren't they more successful at the men's level, considering the huge amount of participation they have in the sport in that area?
Yeah, good question. Well, my whole thing is that they just don't learn the basics. Look at what's happened to basketball. America dominated basketball worldwide. I just heard a crazy statistic the other day, and I can't remember what the percentage was, but a majority of white players in the United States that play basketball in the NBA, they come from Europe. Now you have to ask, how can that be? And the reason is that I've been told by basketball experts is because the Europeans have focused much more on the basics of being a basketball player, and they're better than the Americans are now. So I look at that the same thing with football, or soccer, as you want to call it in the U.S. But basically, kids don't master the skills. For example, my 6-year-old son, when my boy was 6, okay, or 7 years old, he practices every Tuesday from 4:30 to 7 o'clock at night. Every Thursday, 4:30 to 7 o'clock at night. On any given Saturday or Sunday, it could be half a day, it could be a whole day. They could play 3 or 4 games in the morning away, and then they come back at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and practice until 7. So that's culture. Americans would never allow their 7-year-old kid to do that. Okay? So there's certain things that work in certain countries and certain that don't. In Japan, again, another comparison to the United States, they play 52 weeks a year. There's no on-off season. There's no stop and start. High school football, which is going on right now, the national tournament, that basically sells out the national stadium, 50,000 people to watch the final. There's a TV show. Almost all of the games are on live right now. The national tournament's going on. 48 teams competing in it. They're on primetime television. The final is on primetime. So, like I say, these are cultural things. And then they wonder why we develop better technical players here in Japan versus America. It's very simple, They practice more. That's one of it. So in America, it's just a different culture. Parents wouldn't allow their kids to focus as much on football. Let's be honest. Football is a sport that, whether we like it or not, unfortunately, takes a ridiculous amount of time to become good. That's the reality. So if you get that and you buy into that, then you have to figure out, well, how's that kid going to get that practice? Because even if you add up the hours that a kid plays with his regular club team practicing, it doesn't add up enough. It's not enough. So for me now, the biggest lesson that I learned with my kids is that it seems to be, at least for my kids, it's more important what's happening away from the structured practice, what they're doing. And I can tell you this much too. When my kids joined here in Japan, their club team, there were about 22 kids on the team. First grade goes into the team. He's the best kid technically. There's 2 or 3 kids that are halfway decent. Just so happens their fathers used to be players. And then about another 18 players were starting from 0. Okay, now fast forward and look at the makeup of the team. 5th graders, 5 years later. Okay, my kid's the best player. 2 or 3 kids have improved. The other 18 players, it's almost like a time slip. It's almost like nothing happened with their development, progress. Now you have to ask the question, well, how can that be? Well, the way that I look at it is, first of all, they didn't learn or master any of the basics before they started. So they're always playing catch up. They're always behind the 8 ball. And those kids, you'll tend to find, don't practice outside the regular organized practice because they don't enjoy football as much. So why would they? And then you, again, answering your question about America. So there's statistics such as 38.5% of American children drop out of soccer by the age of 7. 50% drop out by the age of 10. So I maintain the reason that, now, for example, coming back to my story with my own kids in Japan. So those 18 kids that I told you, very little progress, those are the kids at risk that are going to drop out. They're going to stop playing. After elementary school, I would say all of those 18 players, all of them, are going to stop playing. They won't play anymore. So, that's, I believe, when you start connecting these dots of what the problem is in the United States, because it's of epidemic proportions, but not just America. It's a lot. The numbers of kids playing football in Europe is on the decline as well. So.
Because obviously we watched your great presentation in Geneva recently, and so you could just go on about talk about what evidence there is for possible gains to be made at 2 to 6. Obviously, I was there with a lot of people. Some people were very sceptical about it. Can you talk about, so you talk about in your books, talk a little bit about the evidence. We live in obviously a society now where people are looking for proof about everything. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Okay, well, again, I'm drawing insights because of my own children, but I'm also seeing that other kids aren't developing, right? Like, for example, if it's just a matter of practicing all the time, then how come I've got this phenomena in my son's class, my son's team, where basically 18 kids haven't progressed? So that's just one right there. That was a huge eye opener for me, because I'm going and I'm seeing very, very little progress, if anything, that's happening with those other kids. And again, that's because by the age of 6, they mastered nothing, zero. They were starting from zero. Then again, like I said, the other evidence to me is when I read the stories. Whether I read the stories about whether it's Pelé, whether it's about Cruyff, whether it's about Messi, whether it's about Neymar, whether it's about Ronaldo, whether it's about Ronaldinho, whether it's about Suarez. You read their stories and you find out that they all started playing from a very, very young age, those kids. And again, coming back to the Latin kid story, a majority of the best players started from the very, very young ages. When you look at also even the few players, for example, I just read an article the other day that was an interview with Pulisic's father, and he basically said that his son, he introduced balls to him when he was as young as 2 and 3 years old, and that gave him such a tremendous head start that when he started playing with older kids later, his technical ability was just off the charts better, because he was a 2-footed player. So for me, I don't need so much more evidence, but I can understand and appreciate people might be a bit skeptical. But I can be honest with you here. I've gone around the world, and I think you saw in Geneva, maybe I put the slide up of all the different groups that I've basically presented to, and I've got little to no skeptics that have actually challenged me on it. And I'm talking about, some of the biggest federations in the world, some of the, players and managers that have managed and played in World Cup tournaments, that have won World Cup tournaments. I did that on purpose because I wanted to basically expose myself to as many people as possible, so that people could challenge me.
Well, I think it's interesting because now we seem to have a lot more people who are coming from a research background, trying to get involved in football, and maybe they haven't seen for themselves the quality or the gains you can have in this area. I mean, for instance, some people will question, the teaching young players 1v1 skills and ball manipulation as saying it imposes movements on players and stunts creativity. That's a big debate we're having at the moment in this country. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I kind of grin about it and I shake my head sometimes, because you know what I say, which is a provocative thing to say, is that these people, show me how your kids play. Do you have kids? I look at it through a completely different set of goggles now. There's so many so-called experts that think that they've got the magic sauce for developing players. Well, show me one kid even that you've nurtured ever, So, you can talk in theory, and it sounds like it should work with these people, with all the mad scientists that think that they've got all of the solutions. But again, you'd be pretty shocked maybe to see that these people have kids that play football, and again, like I say, I practice what I preach. I mean, I've gotten really out on a limb writing a book and exposing myself and letting people into my private life, with my kids, and showing what I've done inside my home and how my kids play. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt about it. My kids are way above average when you watch them playing games. I'm not saying that to try to boast or brag about it. But it's just the reality. So until someone can come along and show me how they've nurtured a kid and they've actually got their, DNA on it, so to speak, or their fingerprint on it, that can actually say, I mean, very few people in the world can really make that claim that they've developed a player. I mean, you've got some of these big academies saying that they've developed these players. But my thoughts are, really,
Yeah, but I suppose it's about, like you, right? It's creating an environment where they can develop and prosper, and speaking to Albert Capellas from Barcelona recently in another podcast, he said, obviously you can't teach that creativity, but you create an environment where they can go and then be prosperous and and develop in those areas, like Iniesta.
Let me tell you something. If you can get a team of 22 6-year-olds that can do or master what my kids were able to do, the elite player pool can only come from that group. Okay, that's the reality of it. And you can't tell me that any coach, first-time coach, would not want to inherit a team of 22 little 6-year-olds that can already master a ball. I mean, I can't see any downside on it.
Well, I mean, what stood out for me about your presentation we saw in Geneva, the ISC conference, was that when you recorded the development of your kids and the technical development on the ball, so from the 2 years old to 6 years old, and then the quality they had on the ball. So for myself, I worked in academy football for 10 years at Tottenham and Chelsea, some of the biggest academies in England, and we get players in at 7 years old often. If we had players that come in with that technical base, that's what really blew me away, because obviously, that's where you got the start. You've got a head start they've got a head start on everyone else. And then, you don't have to spend a lot of time on even the other technical areas, because they've got that head start.
Absolutely. And that's the big thing that I found with my own kids too, because again, like I said, using that story that I told you about my kids playing with the other kids on their team, I'm still incredibly dumbfounded when I go to watch the games and I see that literally 3/4 of the team is just terrible. Terrible. And you say, how can that be? Well, how can that be? Here's what it is. It's tantamount to basically having a class of kids, 22 kids, and let's say it's math, science, or geometry, whatever it is. And basically half of that class you assign homework, and the other half you don't assign homework. Now, those kids are coming to the same class. They're listening to the same teacher. They're doing the same work day in, day out. But I would venture to guess that the kids doing the homework are going to perform better on the tests. Well, that's football. So what happens is that I found that when those kids came in from the age of 6 and didn't master anything, and they were starting from almost a minus sum, that they're always playing catch up, and it's very, very difficult to produce good players from those older age groups. That's the reality of it. And I don't care how many hours you practice. There's one shot that you get, basically, and if you miss that phase of development of the technical part, you're always playing catch up, and it's very hard to go back and catch up on it.
A question leading up to that then is, obviously, if a player starts later on, is it impossible for them to gain them skills if they're starting in that much older age?
I don't think it's impossible. You never say never, but I'd say improbable. And I think that's why we go back to that question, where are the players in the United States? Yeah. So that's what's happening in the United States, exactly what you just said. Kids start older. Even if if a 6-year-old plays or a 7-year-old plays, maybe practice once a week, maybe play a game once a week, and they, they play half the game, they sit on the bench half the game. I mean, it's ridiculous. Look at Australia too. I work in Australia a lot. The season is so short there. The kids practice 1 hour a week in a lot of the teams. Okay, it's tantamount to going to school for a week. Or no, not even a week. It's tantamount to going to school for about 3 or 4 days. That's it. The amount of hours that they get for basically practicing. They play 15 weeks there. So that's 15 hours that they practice.
What would you say then to so-called specialists, I call them, who say working in this ball mastery doesn't transfer to a game? This is another big debate we're having here. Unfortunately, the FA here in England now, ball mastery is not covered in the elite level coaching courses, so it's obviously not appropriate. It's more about putting him in the games and expressing themselves. So what do you say to that idea about it doesn't transfer and just doing everything in a game?
Yeah, well, I do come from the Kerber background. I was involved with those guys for about 14 years at the highest level. Been around all of them. I was one of the rare American directors. I don't think there's any directors on the international level that are directors, so I know it intimately. But I can say this, and in Japan, it's the biggest Kerber business in the world. There's nothing bigger in the world here. There's over 100 branded schools. But all I can tell you is that we inherited the best players. We inherited the best players. Now, can you make them better? I believe yes, you can. But I don't believe that if a kid comes to your football school 1 day a week, and that's what the schools are here, 1 day a week they come, that you can basically say that you're having a big impact on that kid. So I don't know. I mean, I have a rethink about the whole ball mastery thing. I think that it is difficult if you're taking older kids and they don't have a certain degree of technical ability already. I have a question mark about, well, how much better can they really become? Because it's almost like riding a bicycle. I mean, when you ride a bicycle from a very young age, you can basically ride a bicycle for life. And I find that the really, really good technical players And again, I'm talking about in Japan because we're very fortunate. We have a very high level degree of technical players in this country, in Japan. And when you see those players, when even players of my own age, I'm 56 years old, and I've got lots of friends that are around my age and you see when we go out and we even play like little mini games with coaches and things like that, you can see that their technical ability is still so good. And that's because they were so good when they were young. But I can't see. I can see how the ball mastery does relate. And again, it has a lot to do with the coaches as well, how they use it. It's obviously good for a warm-up. But the interesting thing about my kids is that I never really focused on a lot of those ball mastery skills or the moves like traditional kind of 1v1 type of moves. I really just ensured that my kids really mastered pulling the ball back, stopping and starting with the ball, and touching the ball like what we call double touch, right and left foot, using them both.
So then the question would be, then people would ask them, well, how can you know that work in isolation in your front room transfers to the game? Because they'll say that's not a realistic environment. So that was the question I was asking. How can that ball manipulation they're doing, ball mastery, does that transfer to a game situation?
Sure. Well, the way that I think that a transfer is, there's a couple of different ways that I look at it. One is that when the kid actually has success, they want to practice more, first of all. That's one thing. Okay. Again, that intrinsic motivational switch gets turned on. They basically have more fun because they have the ball with them at their feet. They can do more things so that when the ball comes to them, they're not always getting the ball nicked off of them because they've learned to protect the ball. So they're getting much more time on the ball than the other kids that haven't mastered anything. So I would say that it does transfer. It does transfer in a way because basically when a kid, again, it can be slicing hairs too. What is ball manipulation? There might be a big difference between what I believe ball manipulation exercises are versus what you or any other coach has, only because I'm purely a technical coach. And I've made a 20-year living out of creating content, so I understand it, and I know probably a little bit more than the average coach would know about ball mastery. But there's lots of different about ball mastery. There's static stuff. There's on the spot. There's on the move. There's ball mastery that you can create drills and put kids under pressure. So it depends on how you're using it as well, right? And you can have the best knowledge in the world, you can take all your coaching courses in the world, but if you don't have an intelligence level or an understanding on how to use it, I mean, all of these drills and all of these licenses and all of this education is almost meaningless unless you can put it in and make it related to, practicing and getting players to use these technical skills under pressure and trying to figure out, how to get out of problems, how to solve problems. But what I see again, speaking from my own experience with my kid, is that he also seems to be the most creative on the field as well. He tries things that normally most kids would not try. You can see a little bit of the genius of how he tries to go around one or two or three players, or what types of solutions he tries to apply during the games. But I don't know. It's a subject that that's open to lots of different ideas and different, again, culture too. I mean,
my next question was going to be then. Actually, you're working in China now, so you're consultant for the government there. You're working with a huge culture with very little, background football knowledge. So how do you then, implant that onto them? This is why obviously this is now what you do. How do you transfer your knowledge to this whole country?
Yeah. Well, again, by convincing the Ministry of Education, who oversee all football development, that football starts with the technical foundation side. And I don't think anybody really disagrees with that. I mean, up until the age of 10 or 12 years of age, it's purely technical. It has to be.
Well, this is the thing. At the moment, this is not unanimous. It's the idea that, now in England, this now is things people saying actually decision making is more important than technique. So this is the battle we're having in England at the moment.
Yeah. Well, I know. There's lots of controversies. I'm just giving you kind of my personal insight into it, and also when I read and I study and I try to learn from some of the real smart people involved in football. Like, for example, if you remember the presentation that was given by the Belgium technical director, did you sit in on that
Yeah,
one in Geneva?
absolutely.
That was brilliant, man. I mean, that was very good. I'm going to do if you have time, I'm going to do a panel discussion with Romeo Jozak from the Croatian technical. He's the technical director.
Yeah, I know Romeo.
And,
Actually, I've done one with him recently, so there's another one coming up for everybody.
yeah. And I've never met the man, but I've read his work, and you can see the genius in his work. And he's another guy that basically says up until those young ages of, I believe it's maybe 10 or 12 or what have you, that the focus is on the technical side. I mean, and you see, I can see that a little bit differently living in a country like Japan, where I'll give you an example why I say that too. In Japan, we've got one of the best national teams in the world for women. Okay, very few women play football in this country. The last under-17 World Cup, the Japanese girls played in the final. Probably should have won it, but they lost on penalties to North Korea. The 2 years before that, they won the World Cup. Okay, so you've got the same team in the final 2 times in a row. Okay, with different girls, completely different set of girls. They've scored 23 goals for and allowed only 2, and it's very similar to the second tournament. So the question has to be, well, how can that happen? And trust me, it's not the coaching. It's not the coaching. The reason those girls are so good is because they're so good technically. Now, when you've got teams that play technically they're even, tactically they're even, then probably physicality comes into it next. But the reality is that the younger you go and the better the kids are technically, technique seems to win every time.
Yeah, but then how does that technique come? Is it coached, or is it they just developed it naturally? That's the question, right?
Again, I'm kind of splicing the hairs here now, splitting hairs here, and saying to me there's a difference between the teaching and the coaching side. Now, why those? So this was my point. So the point is that not a lot of coaching has to go on when you've got 11 players on the field that are just head and shoulders above everybody technically at a young age. It's almost like autopilot. It's almost like Mickey Mouse could coach that team, and it's probably going to win. Okay, so what I'm saying is that when you get the technical component right, it seems the other parts of the game are much, much more easier to teach or coach or to at least have success. But the problem where it goes wrong is that most countries don't get that technical component right. And I believe that that's one of the reasons that you have a problem in the UK as well, because the player pool at the very young ages, 12 and below, the gap between the very best kids and the worst kids in England is too big. It's big. It's huge. I was over recently and I've seen, some of the different academies from the Premier League, and I've seen their under 10s and under 12s play. And to be honest with you, I was quite shocked. There's lots of teams in Japan that are much, much better than some of the Premier League academy teams are, which was shocking to me. So no, so when it comes to this debate of, whether it's decision making, whether it's the technical side, I mean, I try to avoid those types of arguments, but all I'm trying to basically kind of push, I guess, is that, can parents play a much bigger role in trying to help their kids to become better footballers? Because I see now that you can bring the best coaches in the world to China. You can hire and fire the best coaches or the best players, but you can't hire and fire the parents. And I know now that what can happen at a very young age, if a kid, before he ever steps foot onto a football pitch with an organized coach, if that boy or girl has mastered just a few of the simple techniques of, stopping, starting, turning, changing direction with the ball, that seems to be a massive head start. We can debate lots of parts of the game, the different parts of the game, but, I don't profess to be a specialist in the tactical side or the psychological side or the physical side or anything. But all I'm saying is that from all of my experience, this isn't something that I just picked up with my own kids. This is, 25, 30 years of being a football coach, connecting the dots, understanding also the influence of media, understanding sponsors, understanding how federations operate, understanding how the professionals think, understanding all of these different parts of the game, which I call the ecosystem of football, and understanding that when you can get a country like some of these certain countries that do produce the best teams and players in the world, and you can get them all on the same page and they all understand how development takes place, or at least have an idea, or the entry level for the game isn't going out to the park and just kicking the heck out of the ball all the time and chasing it around with a little 4 or 5-year-old. That's where the magic happens, and that goes back to the beginning of that's why out of 211 member associations, there's only a handful that dominate and kill everybody else.
Yeah, because you talk about the importance of really focusing on grassroots rather than elite level. That's where a lot of countries have gone wrong in the past, focusing too much time on the top and not enough time on the bottom.
I think a majority of the countries go wrong with that. A majority of the countries, if you look at them, they hire these over-experienced, top-notch, their resumes are just like stellar, from federations in Europe, and they bring them out here to Asia. And these guys come out here, and then they try to start organizing all of their, player and elite identification and all of the, all the little buzzwords that go along with the elite game. And then they wind up leaving 4 years later, usually having a kind of a, pulling their hair out, saying that they couldn't get people to buy into this, that, and the other thing. And the reality is that the problem isn't with the elite player development in these countries. The problem is way below that. You can hire the best coaches in the world when the time is right and bring the best elite coaches over. That's easy. And if it was an elite problem, then that solves the problem, right? Just bring over a truckload of coaches and set up programs. But where's that worked? I don't know yet. I don't see where that's worked. So what I'm saying is that in China, getting back to the China question, is that we have a very, very well thought out strategy to educate the 100 million Chinese families with kids under the age of 6. It's 100 million kids, man. Imagine a fraction % of those kids by the age of 6 are as comfortable on the ball as my kids are. Game over, man. Don't tell me it's the national curriculum or the elite player development. Game over. If you start producing players at that basically the entry level, by the time they're 6 years old or 7 years old, they've already mastered a football with their feet. So I mean, this is why I think that more countries need to start waking up and asking, those inconvenient kind of truths of, what is it that they're putting their reresources into.
Well, I mean, essentially, you talk about culture and almost the opportunity you have in China is obviously there isn't one. Obviously, there's no real base culture, whereas the problem we have in England, there is a very strong football culture, and the battle we're having is trying to change that. That's the issue. We're trying to change the culture maybe of how kids play the game and even how coaches coach the game. So the issue we're having is that, obviously we're a history of based in, very physical, very direct, long ball football. And that's and very obsessed with winning those games at younger age groups. So it's a real battle to try and change the culture. We've got any advice to maybe countries like our country who've maybe struggled historically in the past to create technical players?
Absolutely. This is what's so brilliant about what we're talking about right now. We don't need coaches to convince them what we need to do. You need to bypass them and disrupt the way that the coaching, or at least the game, of the development side of the game is perceived, and take it directly to the parents of kids 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's what I'm saying. Yeah, you're not going to convince. That's why it's so much more pleasure for me to work in China versus another country, because it's easy to change or develop or create a culture where they don't have a football culture more than developing a country that has the wrong football culture. And that's the reality of it. So what I'm saying is that, yeah, you can have all those skeptics. You can have all those guys with the PhDs and all of the guys that are trained on, motor skills learning and all of that kind of unstructured, all of that stuff. Because what I'm saying is that that's fine. Let them do what they want to do. But the reality is that all of their science doesn't really work when you don't have players that can't transfer the ball from the right foot from the left foot, when you've got kids that can't do a simple wall pass, when you've got kids that can't even execute a simple overlap. So that's exactly what I'm saying. So in China, that's what we're doing. We're disrupting football development. We're saying, okay, yeah, we're not really. I don't want a room full of 500 coaches. I want a room full of 500 parents with children between 0 and 4 and 5. That's what I want. So it's a different way of thinking. And and a lot of people are agreeing with me now because let's put it this way: what people are doing doesn't seem to be working in many countries. There's nothing, right? So I think this is why our message is resonating with so many people, and I've been invited to speak to so many different groups and so many, whether it's federations or professional clubs or associations or teams. Is because, this is something a bit different. It's a disruption in football development. What I'm saying is that I know now that my kid does not need to be with a highly experienced coach to become a great player. He doesn't. That's the reality. Because my son, who's basically sitting right next to me right now, he just came home, his coach has never played or coached football. He played rugby. And my son just laughed on the sofa when he heard me just say this. That's the truth. So what I'm saying is that if people understand truly how development takes place, there's a lot more that can be done.
Okay, Tom, fantastic. Appreciate your time. Do you want to give people a bit of info about where they can find out more about your great work? Obviously, you have your great book I've got and read. Do you want to give that a little plug and anything else?
Sure. Our website, tomsan.com, which is TOMSAN.com. We have an English button on the top. It's English, Chinese, and Japanese. And our book, you can get the book, which is quite reasonably priced. I think it's less than $10 US dollars.
Yeah, it's less than £10 here as well, available on Amazon.
I mean, hey, it's not a big investment, that's for sure. And also, you can do the ebook if you want to get it immediately. You can just download it to your iPad or iPod or whatever you have, your iPhone. And also, I guess if you Google my name with a couple of code words, whether China or football or soccer in it, there's lots and lots of information on the internet. I've done tons and tons of interviews, similar to what I'm doing with you. But this one that I'm doing with you is much more updated because we're talking today. But there's a lot of information out there. I've thrown just about everything out there, and have exposed myself to as many. One thing I'd also say is that people have to understand also the power and the influence of the media. That's why I very rarely turn down any interviews, whether it's a small group or a big group, because I can always reach lots of people, whether it's in the hundreds or the thousands or in the millions. And, this is fits into our strategy on how we can actually help develop, different areas of the world of football, because it's all about having that knowledge and understanding. So if you go to the website, you can also click on our YouTube channel on our website, because we have a channel that you can go to and you can see some of the different videos of my kids from different ages, like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So you can kind of see, what could you expect a 3-year-old to do with a ball? What could you expect a 6-year-old to be able to do with a ball? We're going to be updating this as well. We've got some new exciting kind of tools that are in development right now that we're going to launch this year as well. That's going to be much more in-depth, and that's going to hopefully aid parents on actually, how can they work with their kids more in depth. So thank you for this opportunity to talk to you and to talk to your listeners.
Tom, thank you very much. That book is Football Starts at Home, just anyone's got the title there. But yeah, Tom, thank you very much for your time. It's been really interesting. Hopefully I'll catch up with you in LA next week. That sounds nice to say that. And thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thanks for tuning in to the MyPersonalFootballCoach.com Soccer Player Development Podcast. MyPersonalFootballCoach.com's Dynamic Ball Mastery Program is the world's leading online individual technical training program, proven and developed at the highest level in the English Premier League. Sign up now to train like the pros and take your game to the next level. Master the ball, master the game.